So let's talk about the defense. What did they use in order to help prove their, that Damien Echols and Jason Baldwin were innocent? So they pushed that Christopher's mutilation would have taken a level of precision and that the teenagers couldn't have carried it out at night in the woods in the water. They also asked if Byers died from his injuries, wouldn't there be more blood? Wouldn't it have soaked into the banks? They argued that the knife attacks were too difficult to do, all of them while in the water, so it must have happened somewhere else before the boys were brought to the ditch. And this countered the prosecution's narrative.
Now, luminol was sprayed by the investigators at the scene, and it did come up with some hints suggesting that maybe there was blood present at the scene. However, soil tests were also taken in September of 1993, and they were proved to be inconclusive. So there's no proof that there was even blood at the crime scene.
Right. There's a possibility that these two boys were killed at some other location and brought there, which I'm like, what doesn't make sense to me is that the fact that they're actually, binded to their ankles. And that to me makes me believe that they did that some other place and then were brought there. And we just don't know by who. Obviously, as the defense for Damien and Jason, part of your plan is going to be to try to cast reasonable doubt on, for the jury. And by doing that, you got to give them some other suspects. So that's when they start pointing towards John Mark Byers,
who is Christopher Byers' stepdad. And what's weird about John Mark Byers is he had given the documentary filmmakers who had worked on Paradise Lost.
There's 3 of them.
Yes, the very famous series of films done on this case. And the 2 guys that were working on this were named Joe and Bruce. And John Mark Byers had given them a knife as a gift. And weirdly enough, it had blood in its hinge. Like, what the hell? Who gives someone a bloody knife as a gift? Especially to someone who's working on a documentary about your son being murdered. Very strange. It was also serrated. So that kind of fits along with the whole narrative. So Joe and Bruce turned it over to the police, and when it was tested, the blood type actually matched both Christopher and John Mark Byers, which led to inconclusive results.
Mark Byers had also admitted to hitting Christopher with a belt earlier on the day he went missing. So like we said earlier, when the police were looking at him as a possible person of interest suspect, they did take hair from him, both hair from the head and pubic hair. And they never found any sort of connection which would tie him to the crime. Plus, he had an alibi.
But they're hoping that this plants enough doubt in the jury's mind.
So after all of the testimony and evidence that the prosecution had been presented to the jury deliberations began on March 17th, 1994 in Damien and Jason's trial. Deliberations ended up going into the next day of March 18th, 1994. And it was at that point that the jury found Damien Echols and Jason Baldwin guilty of capital murder in the deaths of the 3 children. 3 days later, on March 21st, 1994, Jason was given a sentence of life in prison, and they handed down Damien Echols the death penalty, both because he was over 18 at the time of the court decision, as some argue, because he had been made out as the leader and the mastermind of this crime. Like, he was the main perpetrator here. So he got death, literally put on death row for this. So Jason is actually sent to the penitentiary at Pine Bluff, while Damien is sent to death row in the state's maximum security prison near Varner, Arkansas. Literally a month or 2 later, they appealed their convictions. All 3 of them did. And it actually went up to the Arkansas Supreme Court on February 19th, 1996. But the Arkansas Supreme Court issues a decision upholding the conviction of Jesse Miskelly. And then at the end of 1996, the Arkansas Supreme Court also issued decisions upholding the convictions of Damien Echols and Jason Baldwin, which is just crazy. It's crazy to think about that even the Arkansas Supreme Court did not see enough there to allow them just to get a new trial.
That gives me zero confidence in our legal system. I mean, this case was weak as fuck. How did they not see a problem?
Yeah, and I mean, look at all the other cases out there, like even Julius Jones, like the Supreme, the state Supreme Court won't do anything, won't even give you a new trial when there's so much evidence that suggests that you're innocent of the crimes that you've been convicted of. But
how can they take that chance? It's just crazy.
Yeah, and it's just like, again, comes back to the whole criminal justice system being broken. Like, there's checks and balances. That's literally how it works. And the reason why there's an Arkansas Supreme Court at all is to, sort of govern the local jurisdictions. And the fact that, I think in a lot of times politics comes into play, and they just don't want to go against each other, and
go back and look at possible mistakes and admit wrongs.
Exactly. So I think that's what happened here.
And Damien, facing death is just terrifying. I can't imagine how he felt. Being on death row for something you didn't do has got to be the worst thing possible.
Yeah, and as young as he was too. I mean, he's 18, 19 years
his
old.
Whole life to live.
Yeah, and they actually did an interview with him in 1996 when he had just been put on death row. That's pretty telling about where his mind is at this time. So we'll just play a little clip of that.
I think teenagers probably have trouble ever imagining anything but immortality for themselves. They seem to believe that they're indestructible. I mean, I was the same way. I guess all teenagers are. They believe, I guess, nothing could ever happen to them. But when you wake up one morning and realize that you're on death row and you're waiting there day after day for them to set you an execution date, pretty hard reality check. I think you realize it's a pretty harsh world. I wouldn't change anything that's ever happened in my entire life. Nothing. Everything that has happened in my life has came together to create and make me the person that I am now. And if any of those things were changed, then the person who I now am would not exist. I wouldn't think the same way about things. I wouldn't feel the same way about things. I don't think there was anything I could do to change that. What was it? I mean, become a clone, give up my personality, give up my identity.